No, that's the mistake. Because if that were true, then you wouldn't be an epiphenomenalist. Because if the fact that you're now telling me that you detect your consciousness is an effect of your detecting it, then your detecting it is an effect of the epiphenomenon, and that's ruled out by definition.
Well,
that's the trouble.
Now you've gotten that's an interesting.
That's the trouble with epiphenomenalism, is it's an incoherent view.
Okay, but here's the interesting thing. I've thought about this a lot lately. That in the human species, I mean, even if you're an epiphenomenalist in this sense, okay, you think when pain, subjective pain, arose in a lizard or in a worm or whatever. Okay, let's go back millions and millions of years in natural selection. Subjective experience arose as an epiphenomenon, okay? And you can imagine that, right? You can imagine that a worm has an epiphenomenal consciousness.
No, I can't.
Why not?
Because, I'll say it again slower, I guess. The very concept of epiphenomenalism, of effects that have no effects, is completely unmotivatable. Always, always, always.
What does that mean?
It means, you agree, I think, that the view that there are 7 epiphenomenal gremlins in every cylinder is a view that is not to be taken seriously, right?
It doesn't seem likely to be true to me.
Well, compare it with that there's 6 epiphenomenal gremlins, or 3, or 7.
Equally implausible.
Not just implausible.
Right.
It's defined in such a way that you could never possibly have any reason to assert it.
So it's not amenable to scientific analysis?
No, it's worse than that. It's trivial in a certain way. There could be no motivation for asserting it.
If the engine said, I've got gremlins, I'd start taking it seriously. And that's what happens.
If the engine said, I've got gremlins, one thing you would know is it couldn't be saying this because it had gremlins. Because if there were gremlins, they wouldn't be causing it to say it, because that would be a contradiction.
Your critique of epiphenomenalism does become relevant when you have organisms talking about their consciousness. But tell me how it doesn't make sense in an earthworm or a lizard. I say, look, the lizard, okay, it sticks out its paw into a fire and it retracts the paw. Now, it feels pain at that moment. And I think the pain is an epiphenomenon, because what's really happening functionally that gets it to retract its paw is this physical information goes up and down, blah, blah, blah. Its feeling of pain is a kind of shadow of that. Now, why could that not be the case? Don't get into gremlins. Just tell me, in the case of the lizard, where is the logical contradiction there?
Well, because we don't know what you mean by its feeling pain in addition to the events going on. Maybe it just is.
Feels like. I assume lizards, if they feel pain, and you believe some non-human animals feel pain, feel something like it feels to us, okay?
But that doesn't get us.
We can't know. But
that doesn't get us to epiphenomenalism. It just gets us to sensation.
Well, right, but we're talking about a sensation that I'm positing is an epiphenomenon.
Well, but that's what we don't know what that means yet.
We do know what epiphenomenon means. It is caused by, but does not in turn influence.
Well, but let's then note that if it doesn't influence anything, then it doesn't influence the lizard.
Right.
So it doesn't, for instance, cause the lizard to believe it has pain.
No, lizards don't think about that kind of thing.
No, and so, in fact, the lizard is completely clueless with regard. The lizard. And the lizard's own mental state is precisely as if it didn't have a sensation of pain.
No, its mental state is not.
Well, now you're contradicting yourself.
No, its mental state is the consciousness. Of course, its consciousness is influenced.
But now you're just helping yourself to dualism.
Well, epiphenomenalism is a kind of dualism. It's just not interactionist. I mean, the causality moves in one direction with epiphenomenalism. I mean, where is the contradiction in the case of a lizard? It's true that once you get humans, consciousness does start influencing things, like it's the reason we're having this conversation. And that's an interesting fact. But if you go back earlier in evolutionary time, an epiphenomenalist view of consciousness has is a coherent concept. And the fact that a consciousness that's originally epiphenomenal might later have an effect is an interesting fact with philosophical significance.
Well, I suppose it's also a coherent concept that that the pebbles on the beach feel, they sense the gravity. They have this.
I don't know. I doubt they do. But the thing about consciousness.
Do you think that's a serious?
I call that
hypothesis?
highly unlikely.
Just highly unlikely.
But the whole thing about consciousness is, and this is where the thing about consciousness. It's one of those questions where when two people disagree, it isn't just they disagree; they don't even understand each other. And this is where this is a difference between you and people like me who have an alternative view. To us, an essential feature of consciousness is that no one other than the conscious being can ever verify the consciousness. It's an inherently private state, and that's one reason science may never penetrate it. Science studies publicly observable things.
If you define consciousness that way, then you get your conclusion in a single step, right? Science can't study it. But let me show you how I can define something the same way, too, which science can't study, and you tell me how your view differs. You know how naive Americans they go to Europe and they're asked how much something costs, and they're told so many euros, and they say, well, how much is that in real money? That is to say, in dollars. And they think, well, dollars. There's a sense in which dollars have value, in which euros and Swiss francs and so forth don't really. I mean, they have relative value relative to dollars, but dollars have intrinsic value. Now, we say, no, dollars don't have intrinsic value. It's just the exchange for goods and services. It's not as if dollars have an intrinsic value that yen or euros don't have. And they say, no, I define the vis of a dollar as its intrinsic value. And I submit that economic theory cannot ever explain the intrinsic value of a dollar. And they're right. By definition, the intrinsic value of a dollar is something which is forever outside the purview of economics. The thing is, there's no reason to believe that dollars have intrinsic value. The fact that somebody in their gut has this deep-seated intuition that dollars have intrinsic value, well, that's an interesting fact about them, but it's nothing that science has to maybe explain why they have that weird hunch. But they don't have to explain the intrinsic value of a dollar because there isn't any intrinsic value to a dollar. And similarly, I take on the burden of explaining why you have the intuition that you have, that this is what consciousness is. And I think I can give a pretty good explanation of why it seems that way to you. But you're just wrong.
No, I don't want to hear that.
I know you don't.
I mean,
that's
with the dollar. I mean, but in any event, why? I mean, there is an explanation about dollars, but let's not get into that. And why some people are confused about dollars. The relevance of that to your claim that I'm confused about consciousness is something I'm not completely clear on. But let me just tell you some things that you've said about consciousness that strike me as getting at the difference in the way we look at it. Okay. You've written that a chess-playing computer is, quote, manifestly not a conscious or self-conscious agent, unquote. How could you know for sure? I don't think they are conscious. I mean, I don't know. I doubt it. But how could you know for sure that there is that a computer is not having an internal subjective experience?
Well, because I have a view of consciousness as playing an important role. And I know everything that's playing an important role in that chess-playing computer, and there's nothing that's remotely like consciousness.